Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul, and in this RedGamingTech.com video, wow, that was an event, wasn't it? Yeah, I almost feel that the level of expectation on AMD going in to the, quote, Where Gaming Begins event was, I would almost say it was almost unfair. Like, it was so high, and yet AMD did just, it surpassed what the expectations were. We also got a small preview of RDNA 2, along with, of course, the Zen 3 information. And we'll start with that first. AMD started with kind of several claims. They obviously hyped up what they've achieved in the past, and then provided a little insight into what the goals were for Zen 3, higher boost clock speeds, significantly increased IPC uplift, new core layout, new cache topology, and finally 7nm, of course, is still the processor it's manufactured on. But it was just a little bit later than that we actually started to understand what AMD were actually doing with the architecture. And perhaps the slide which really got me the most was Zen 3 core architecture, wider, faster, and even more efficient. And I'm going to read this out verbatim. 8-core complex, lower latency, significant accelerator for PC gaming applications, 2 times, direct access level 3 cache, reduced memory latency for gaming, and the one that almost floored me was a 19% desktop IPC uplift, which of course means greater performance across all applications. So what this basically means is the lower latency and direct memory access is really a function of what we learned about the differences between the CCX/CCD layout of Zen 2 versus, of course, the layout in Zen 3. We've discussed this numerous times in the past, rather extensively, but this is really the result of that, and it's a significant increase in performance. It also means that any of the cores on that particular CCX, CCD, have access to a much larger chunk of level 3 cache, which obviously does improve performance significantly. AMD are testing this apparently with a fixed frequency of 4 GHz to ascertain the IPC gains. So what they've done basically is lock the cores at 4 GHz and are testing with 8 cores. And in the industry leadership Zen 3 19% IPC uplift for PC slide, they have basically broken down how the Zen 3 architecture improves over Zen 2. It basically kind of gives you an overview of each of the characteristics of the CPU. So cache prefetching is obviously a pretty significant improvement. Improvements to execution engines, improvements to branch predictor, micro-op cache, front end and load stores, all of which have seen significant improvements. And then in the next slide, they do further elaborate on the layout of the Zen 2 versus Zen 3 core in terms of the cache. Unfortunately, some of the improvements that I just detailed a moment ago, such as advanced branch prediction or what have you, were not extensively detailed. I assume that we will get more information on that as the processes come closer to release, and or it may just be press that get to detail this when they provide the relevant slides to press, like architecture details. It's a bit of a shame, but it is what it is. And honestly, I think most of us in this video anyway, in this particular conference, were mostly focused on performance and just how they were going to be executing with Zen 3. And there were 4 models that were demoed, or rather shown off. Basically, what we have here is the 5600, 5800, 5900, and finally the 5950, with AMD spending most of the time really focusing on the 5900X. And I think the reason behind that is they kind of feel that it's the flagship most people would be going for, and it's also more similar to the pricing that Intel are charging for its processors. The 5950X is like $799, although we'll discuss prices and release timings and stuff in just a moment. So I think that this is the one that they kind of feel is almost flagship against Intel's flagship. And I wouldn't honestly be surprised if Intel do get forced to have a price cut here. So the 5900X was being tested against the 3900X. Robert Halleck was kind of detailing this. And while there are some very impressive gains, for example, in Ashes of the Singularity, which is a 19% uplift, this is again versus the 3900X. And that's definitely a pretty big positive. Battlefield 5, 5%, nothing too big there, but still. To me, the real winners were League of Legends and CSGO. 46% improvement in CSGO is a lot. I can't put it any other way. It's a lot. And then, of course, they did the inevitable. They actually compared it against Intel because at the end of the day, well, they know that the biggest competitor for them would be Intel in terms of gaming at the moment. So, in the very next slide, they do compare against the 10900K. Again, this is with the high image quality preset at 1080p. There's not much to say other than owie, because CSGO here is 19% faster for AMD. There are a couple of exceptions to the performance gains, like Battlefield does still slightly edge out on Intel's platform, but it's like minus 3%. There's 1% on Total War Three Kingdoms. I think that they're actually choosing that one because Intel typically have been using that in a lot of tests. So I think that was definitely a deliberate PR move. Ashes of the Singularity, they're a little faster than Intel. Far Cry New Dawn, again, is another one that Intel have typically win-rad on. They tend to do very well in that because it uses one thread very heavily. Shadow of the Tomb Raider, again, Intel have historically had a nice lead on it. But I know I keep saying this, and you're probably sick of me saying it, but again, it's CSGO, which really just hits home. Because it's not a demanding game, but in terms of like the bare minimum that it requires to run. But if you have a competitive gamer, they want this thing to be running as high a frame rate as possible. So yeah, like, there's not much to say. Other than that, it's really bloody quick. That is really fast. And then we do move over to the 5950X. And again, I can't say anything here other than it's just bad for Intel. They actually just demolish Intel in workloads for content creation. So V-Ray's almost 60% improvement. And video games, again, they have an even more significant lead. And it's worth noting as well that they did show Cinebench. And one criticism that I've had in the past of AMD is that Cinebench scales really well across multiple processor threads. So obviously, the very beginning, they were comparing, like, let's say the 1800X against the 7700K, and it's not incorrect to say that, yes, the 7700K was getting a butt kicked in multi-threaded because it's not got as many cores, but it was single-thread performance, you know, it wasn't doing that. However, a 10900K does score around 540, 550 points in Cinebench R20 single-core performance, that is. And of course, it does depend on system configuration if you're overclocking and all of the normal caveats. But they are scoring 631 points with the 5900X, again, single thread. And they actually score 640 points, apparently, with the 5950. That is actually a single thread record. Actually, the 5900X is the single thread record, and then they basically beat their own record with the 5950X. That is just monstrous. I cannot put it any other way. That is ridiculous levels of performance. So as for pricing then, well, I had said I wouldn't be surprised if AMD increases the prices for its CPUs, and here is evidence of that. It's not a huge increase, but it's basically $50 across different SKUs. 749, for example, previously for the 3950X to now 799. And at the end of the day, I think AMD were obviously going to do it because of the performance increase. I know it's going to annoy people, but at the end of the day, they are a for-profit company. Um, and yeah, this is exactly why I've said many times now that I do not like it when one company has a compelling product and the other companies don't have a counter. Because I think if Intel did have a CPU which was able to compete very well with gaming performance from AMD, maybe if Rocket Lake was launching at kind of similar timing, maybe they wouldn't increase the prices like this, but it is what it is. Well, yeah, there's not much more to say on it. It just is what it is. And the 5900X has a boost frequency of 4.8 GHz, 3.7. You can read it yourself on the screen. And the 5950X has a slightly higher boost frequency at 4.9. Unfortunately, we don't know how that obviously is affected as more cores are loaded or whatever. And all of these CPUs apparently will launch on the 5th of November, which is not too long away. It's about a month as of the time I'm recording this. And I'm sure you would agree that, well, these things are probably going to sell pretty well. I wonder why there's no 5700X. I assume that will launch later on. When it comes to the selection, the only negative I have is I do wish the 5800X was like $50 cheaper. I would have liked it to have been like $400 or $399 technically. But, you know, whatever. The prices are what they are. But yeah, that is a ridiculous amount of performance for these CPUs. I'm honestly shocked at the IPC gains. I had leaked many times that we're looking at 20-ish% on average, 15% for integer and all of that stuff. But to actually see it and to see the performance... And this also does poo-poo a couple of other rumours. The first rumour is that they were hitting 5 GHz, and the second is that the TDP was higher. I must admit, that TDP thing, 150 watts, did seem really suspicious to me, because that would mean that the power delivery on most motherboards just wouldn't be working, but, I mean, that was the rumour. Either way, I'm really happy with the performance increases we have here. Now, I do want to mention RDNA 2. So, Lisa does show off actually physically holding the card, the 6000 series, and she actually calls it Big Navi. She doesn't actually specifically mention models or plans for that, but they basically do. They show off Borderlands running, but without like MSI Afterburner or performance metrics, but they do give a very small hint as to the performance with slides, and it's only a couple of games that they've chosen to do this with. I'm actually trying to click through to the exact point here. For those trying to find it, it's 23:37 I found it. And Borderlands 3 is running at 61 frames a second. That's at badass quality. These are all 4K results. Call of Duty Modern Warfare Ultra Quality is hitting 88 frames a second, and Gears 5 is 73 frames a second. Now, I'm assuming that that's ultra quality with Gears, and that they're running basically with ultra textures and everything else. Again, that would put it... I'm actually looking at my own RTX 30 results, my RTX 3080 results here, and that is basically what I'm getting with my 3080. So I have a 10900K, and I'm assuming that they're 100% GPU bound here, so I honestly don't think it makes any difference what CPU they have. So I'm assuming that it's going to be basically the same thing. And the 10900K and the RTX 3080 that I have, I was testing the MSI variant of this, and I was scoring at 74 frames a second, and I was testing an RTX 3080 Founders Edition card, which NVIDIA have sent over, and I am scoring 73 frames a second. So that is basically on par, and the same thing for Borderlands and other things as well. They are pretty much getting the same level of performance. Borderlands scores around 60 FPS with the RTX 3080 as well. Again, of course, there are the caveats of some game engines performing probably better on AMD GPUs. I'm sure that these results are games that do pretty well on AMD's architecture, and naturally we are missing certain details here, such as how well it performs in hardware-based ray tracing. We don't know feature set yet, so does it have, for example, DLSS or an equivalent technology? Well, I don't think it's going to have DLSS because obviously that's NVIDIA proprietary, but I mean an equivalent type of upsampling technology. None of that is confirmed. So at the end of the day, there are just still a ton of questions which need to be answered here. And I think it's fair to say, though, that AMD have definitely put both NVIDIA and Intel on notice. Again, I don't think NVIDIA are doomed or anything like that. I think that the 30 series is incredibly strong, and I think that they will perform very well. I just think that this time round, we actually have some really good competition in the high end. As for my overall thoughts of RDNA 2 performance, I have a couple of questions. One, is this the highest end GPU which AMD have? Because they seem to be kind of have a habit of like holding things back. Maybe this is the highest end GPU. Who knows? Second, some of the results I've seen online for Gears, they've shown that Eurogamer, for example, they've actually got higher results than the ones I've got for Gears 5. But then again, hardware on bulks have similar levels of performance to me, 72-ish or 73, I don't remember now. So what I'm trying to say is, don't buy any of AMD's products or whatever until we get reviews. I personally maintain what I've said, and that is that AMD will be very competitive to NVIDIA. I still think that NVIDIA will have the ray tracing advantage. I think AMD will be cheaper. But at the end of the day, again, if you're going to plonk down money, I suggest that you wait for reviews. So yeah, with that said, I think that's just about it for this video. Hopefully, you've enjoyed it. With all that said, take care of yourselves. Bye for now.